So, by the way, the first phase and the last phase, right, are the two most neglected phases. And believe it or not, Lyssa, these are the most potent phases of the 7-phase journey, right? Because not only do they require a deep level of reflection and foresight, and we know leaders are very good with, a lot of things, but trying to think out in the future is not something that comes to everyone easily.
Hello and welcome to the Coaching Studio. I'm your host, Lyssa deHart, and today I have the distinct pleasure of spending time with Navid Nazemian. He is a PCC with the International Coaching Federation. Navid is also an executive transition coach with a deep passion for supporting leaders through pivotal transitions. He is also the best-selling author of Mastering Executive Transitions, the Definitive Guide, which has become a go-to resource for leaders stepping into new roles. What makes Navid so remarkable isn't just his impressive achievements, but also his genuine warmth and commitment to helping leaders stay true to themselves, even in the most challenging of times. With over 2 decades in human resources at some of the world's most admired companies, his expertise is recognized on an international stage. Navid brings a unique global perspective, having lived and worked in places like Germany, the UK, and the United Arab Emirates. His international experience allows him to connect with people from all walks of life, and his ability to speak English, German, and Farsi respects a love of learning and a connection to many rich cultural tapestries. Navid, your dedication to guiding executives through such critical transitions is truly inspiring. I'm thrilled to dive into this conversation with you today on the studio. So welcome to the studio. And I'm looking forward to hearing how you share your coaching with others.
Sure, Lyssa. First off, thank you so much. I have been a guest on 28 other podcasts, and your introduction has to be the best introduction ever. So let me give you a thing right away. I'm not sure my wife would agree with most of what you shared there, but hey, for the moment, I'm going to take it all in and just be here.
You know what? Soak it up, and then you can show it to her and say, honey, look, see, honey.
Yeah.
I love it. So, Navid, I really love to start this podcast with the idea of how you or coaching found you, or you found coaching, but really what was sort of this evolution that happened between where you started off playfully playing around as a kid somewhere in the world and ended up here on, how many podcasts have you been on now?
28. This is 29.
29. How did you end up here being on 29 different podcasts?
Yes. So first off, so this is great. The origin story, right? And you did say at the outset that I spent 20 wonderful years working in the HR function. And this really started as a curiosity and an intrigue of mine, Lyssa. So this is me, many, many years back now, probably 15, 16 years back, where we had this situation where we had a fantastic leader, a sales machine, who would kill any and all targets. But that sales performance came at a cost on the leadership side and on the team leadership side. And so I remember very vividly that conversation when I was the head of HR unit, sitting in the boardroom and having a succession planning conversation with the rest of the exco. And as soon as at the time, the sales director put up the name of that individual as a potential successor to his own seat, hell broke out. There was vehement disagreement in the room that was aired, broadcasted very strongly. And, it was very clear to me that although I had this slight impression ahead of the meeting that there may be a reaction to it, I just couldn't foresee that to be so strongly. And so here is, year one, let's call it year one. And on the back end of that conversation, I did suggest if everyone would be happy to continue to invest in that leader, because arguably there were some real upsides to their performance and some dark side traits that we probably needed to address. And so everyone's agreed, and they did put in the disclaimer to say, well, not much is going to change anyhow, but yeah, for now we're happy to invest. So I then reached out to the mothership. They sent me a fantastic coach, an MCC by the way, from South Africa. This gentleman worked with this leader for 12 months. Lyssa, believe it or not, a year later we are sitting in the same succession planning meeting conversation with almost the same set of stakeholders. 2 had changed out of 12, and people are arguing whether the sales director role is actually good enough for someone like him, or whether we should be thinking outside of the country, something broader, bigger, more complex, more wonderful. And here's me thinking, holy moly, how is it even possible within a year's time, with the support of arguably the most competent coach, that there is this fundamental shift in the leadership possible? And so that is kind of my origin story. And of course, I did reach out to the coach. We had a conversation. He didn't tell me anything about what they actually did. All he told me is that, we all have our dark side traits, and sometimes they just get the better side of us. And so that was my intrigue moment. And of course, I kept that in my heart, and going forward, I utilized coaching as an instrument, as a buyer of coaching services much more frequently. Always went with advice, always went with expertise of the coach, made sure that there's a good chemistry and good match, and that I bring those expert coaches in to deal with those expert topics. And of course, at some point, Lyssa, I was ready to kind of dive in myself and, not just to be a spectator or an observer to this, but really sit on the, in the room, on the other side of the table, and have a go at it. And the rest is history, as we say.
Well, and I think it's fascinating too, how easy it is for us to, as human beings, to have an idea of nothing will ever change, that this is set, personality is set, these bad qualities are set. And the thing that really shows up for me too, as you're talking, is just how flexible. I mean, this whole idea of neuroplasticity is this idea that brains can change, not good or bad, just a thing, but that this person with support could turn into somebody completely different in the minds and hearts of the people that they were working with. And it sounds like they got really fabulous, deep transformational coaching, if I'm hearing you correctly.
They certainly did. And it was enough to, spark that intrigue in me to understand really, other than having a conversation, what is it that can bring about such transformational shift? And so, yes, that's when I then started to look around, speak to a number of people. I interviewed 10 of the most competent coaches I knew at the time. And I spoke to 5 training providers before I decided this is the one path I would like to take. And of course, I am biased today by saying this is the best path that I could recommend to myself, but this is true, and it's really worked well for me. So I'm very happy.
Yeah, well, and I think that this really, there are, for those of us who really love learning, but also really appreciate that transformative process, there's this sort of nexus that coaching provides of, like, I get to learn to grow myself. I get to learn to grow with other people. I get to support other people's growth. I mean, there's this like really wonderful space in which we're supportive, but also it requires us also, right?
Sure. I mean, that was one of the reasons why I decided for the path that I choose at the time, where I really felt that, functionally speaking, as an HR leader, not saying that I was a complete HR leader, but I really thought to have topped out in terms of what more can I learn that is non-technical, non-functional. And so I really was intrigued by the idea to go into the vertical development versus a horizontal development. I could have gone for an MBA or some like the HR program at Cornell University or something like that. But really, what is the deep learning that I'm going to get out of those? Whereas I am going to become a newbie, a rookie student, sitting in a room with a bunch of established leaders who all bring their own version of the best selves to the room, and then grow and shape and learn and shapeshift. Also, some of what I had appreciated as my reality at the time, and so that was really the beginning of the journey. And it was a very laborious way. I do admit that it was a 3-year track across 3 continents for me to educate myself to become a coach. And I did it back to back to back. And so it was a wonderful journey. It was hard. It was a struggle. It was a challenge, but it was a delight. And it was fantastic learning. And so, yeah.
Well, and I'm curious too, as you were going through that learning process, what did you discover that really made coaching distinctive from, say, consulting or being an HR, executive who knows a lot about like systems and has a lot of experience? How did coaching differentiate for you?
Yes. I mean, it was really for me also to unlearn some of my previous habits, right? I mean, I spent most of the 20 years in the people function as a generalist. So I was the head of HR, an HRD, or senior HR, head, division HR, VP, and so on. And so that meant that, I was sought after as a people expert, right? I never carried the title of a consultant, but the reality is that's what got me those promotions. That's what got me to be assigned to so many different countries. I had the pleasure and fortune to work in 5 different countries. And so, there was something about my way of working and my way of relating to other people that made them to want me to grow as well, professionally speaking. But the reality is, I was more of an expert advisor than I was as a coach, even informally in that setting. And so that's where I had to, I remember very well when I had to submit my tape recordings as part of the certification exercise. And at the time, my tape coach came back and said, he knew I grew up in Germany, so he had to give me all the numbers and the data for me to believe in what he's suggesting. And he said, I just went through the 2 submissions of yours. One was, 45 minutes. The other one was just over an hour. And I clocked the time, how much you spoke and how much your client spoke. And I realized that you spoke more than 62% of the time. Right?
How did this change? Like, what did this do for you?
Well, yeah. Well, what's wrong with that, right? So
I'm doing great then.
I had to be sat down by my mentor coach to go back to the roots to say, okay, how about allowing some space for your client to flourish? How about taking a pause and letting them to struggle for a minute or 2 or 5, if that's what helps them to realize that this current way of working is probably not the most helpful way. And so it really was, and I kid you not, it really was, and apparently it's something like, I forgot the number, it's 35 times harder to unlearn a skill than to learn it. Right? Oh. It's like, there's this famous guy, I forgot his name, he did this experiment on YouTube. So he disassembled his bicycle and he made it to be the other way around so that, he had to kind of cycle back to cycle forward. And when he made the left turn, the bicycle actually turned right. And it took him 35 times longer to unlearn in his brain, rewire his brain with the new adjusted bicycle than when he, didn't know how to ride a bicycle and then learn it very, very quickly. So.
Okay, so I want to just put a pin in this because it goes into everything. Like how we even, like if I naturally put my arms like that, trying to do this, it takes actual thinking in order to be able to do it opposite from the way that you normally do it. And that's brilliant. And so how do we give ourselves a bit of grace as we're learning how to undo something so that we can do something new? I think is crucially important. I love that. I'm gonna go find that study. I'll be putting a link to it because I think that's really fascinating. It's really fascinating. And I mean, honestly, one of the things that we hear in business all the time is the things that got you here aren't going to get you there. Yes, all the stuff I learned in order to get to be this person who is now in this role, ready for a promotion or for a step into a higher level of leadership, is not going to be the skills that are going to keep me in that role as a leader. How do you see with the people that you work that movement through from here to there?
Sure. So first off, Marshall Goldsmith is the fabulous author behind that book that's titled "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." I actually met him 6 weeks ago. He was here in the Middle East. This is his very last tour outside of the US. And he's an amazing guy, an established coach. I think it goes without saying. And he told me something that I never believed to be true. He said, "Look, I've authored 44 books, right? 44 books over the course of his life, which is, he just turned 75. This one book has outsold all the other 43 books of mine, right? And he just had come from India to the UAE. And he told me that in India, like the week before he came to the UAE, that book was on the number 2 best-selling business book charts, right? Which is like incredible. So the simple idea of what got you here won't get you there is very much true. And that is, such a compelling wisdom that it's still selling, like the 7 Habits, right? I mean, the 7 Habits were written many, many years back, but there's a reason it's the most sold leadership book in the world, because it's like universal truth. Now, coming back to your question, how do I work with that? I mean, there are 2 or 3 different frameworks and instruments that I use in my coaching. The first one is, let's say you, Lyssa, have been, going from being, a functional leader. Let's say you were the CHRO of this organization, and the chairman has tapped you on the shoulder to appoint you into becoming a CEO, right? That's a table stakes type situation. So one of the instruments I would utilize in my coaching with you is, okay, Lyssa, these are the list of transition challenges that I can imagine will come your way. Let's you now go over these and assess yourself on those at the same time to say, do I believe it's actually true, or this is just, you don't know the organization enough to know that this is actually not going to happen, right? This is not important for me, but this one is, and this one is. And then as a next step, I'm going to get you to rate yourself on a scale from 0 to 10. How confident are you that you will be able to manage this upcoming transition? Let's say it's the new organization challenge, or it's the big promotion challenge, or it's the international move challenge, or it's the realignment of the entire business challenge. Once you give me those 2 data points, I know how to work with you over the course of the next 6 to 12 months to help you really go deep on those areas that you believe you need to do the most upskilling or the most grading in your capabilities. That's the first data point that I established. The second one, and this is a study that I use, is from DDI. I love it. It's actually a generic study, but you can utilize that, with anyone you like. So what they did is to look at the top level executives, the senior leaders, and kind of the more middle managers or a little closer to entry level. And then they said, they asked something like 4,000 leaders to rate. They said these are the typical core skills and activities that happen in these 3 levels. Now, whilst that's a generic study, I take that study and sit down with you, if you were my coaching client, and say, okay, Lyssa, now that you are about to step into the CEO position, by the way, I will start to work with you before you being appointed, which defeats the core purpose of the first 90 days, which is the silliest idea of all, that at the executive level, you start on day 1 and you're done on day 90. I yet have to find a single executive that can transition like that. Now, whilst I do not want to belittle the idea that any structured onboarding is wonderful, at the top of the house, it takes, in my opinion, in my experience, 12 to 18 months to transition into a new position. So that then means, Lyssa, that you and I are going to sit down and you and I are going to spend a session or so to think about how do you need to shapeshift, looking at the future role, your skills and capabilities to the new reality that's expected of you. And that essentially means oftentimes that what got you here won't get you there. Just because you have been the best salesperson, that doesn't mean you're going to be the most successful CEO. Just because you have been the best CFO, that doesn't guarantee anything to you other than you have the numbers covered. And so it really is trying to step into the future role with the support of some, tools to then come back and, inform the coaching as to what is it that I need to focus on between now and the next month or two.
Hi, Lyssa here. I want to interrupt real quick and just say thank you for being a viewer on this channel. I very much appreciate you being here. And I'd also like to make an invitation to you. I love to meet people and have more one-to-one interactions with them. And to that end, I have a monthly coaching Q&A. We cover all kinds of topics, coaching related. And I would love to invite you, my treat, to that monthly coaching, those monthly coaching sessions. You can find a link below. And I want to just say thank you. And I look forward to meeting you on a monthly Q&A soon. Cheers. And now back to your regularly scheduled programming. So something you just said too, if I heard you correctly, I believe I did. You said, this 60 days or whatever,
90 days, first 90 days,
90 days to get kind of up and running. And what you're seeing is, did you say 18 months?
12 to 18 months. Yes. The double diamond framework is 12 plus months. So
I know I saw on another podcast that you were on that something, I don't know what the crucial percentage was. I know you do. A pretty high percentage of new executives fail in the first year. And what do you think? I mean, it seems obvious to me, but I'd still love to hear it from you. The connection between this idea of 90 days to transition versus really a year to 18 months to transition is to that outcome of that success or failure. And I use the word failure sort of loosely, of not actually staying in the position that they then were hired for. First, what is the percentage that I'm not remembering?
Yes. So believe it or not, I mean, when I started to do the research for my book and I stumbled upon this study, I couldn't believe it. I thought it must be a typo. It's maybe 4%. It's 40%. 40% out of 10 executives do not make it within the first 18 months of being appointed into the new executive role. And there are 5 independent studies that prove this. The most validated one, I recently had a gentleman who, based on this post on LinkedIn, he came back to me, this must be a year ago, and said, I'm not sure, is this study done in a double-blinded this and that? And I said, look, this study that I'm citing, the one out of the 5, had 20,000 cases analyzed.
That's pretty significant.
I wish all of the leadership studies that I get into my inbox on a weekly basis had that same sample size of leadership being, reviewed. Now, that study is from Heidrick & Struggles, one of the largest search firms in the world, one of the most successful ones. And they have done the exact same thing. So they placed over 20,000 execs during a 10-year time period. And when they went back and analyzed those appointments, they saw that in those first critical 18 months, 40% did not make it. As simple as that. Now, other studies, Harvard Business Review has done different studies, and they looked at what is the difference between internal promotions versus external hires. And of course, as you would guess, external hires are a little more risky, a little more than internally promoted leaders. Then there is the study that was done by Egon Zehnder. There's another study that was done by Michael Watkins, who was the author of the first 90 days. So they all come to very much the same conclusions, which is why 4 out of 10 don't make it. And Lyssa, I have 156 citations in my book. The appendix is 22 pages long. That was the easiest part of my research. When you go and type into Google, or these days ChatGPT didn't exist when I wrote my book, to say, give me 10 examples of epic CEO transition failures, you will find thousands of pages of search results because there is just so many samples available.
Wow. Well, and then it really does speak to the value of this sort of this system of developing awareness, where I'm looking at what are the things that are probably going to be required of me. How do I even see myself reflected between, okay, I'm at a 1 here, like I don't feel confident at all, but I'm at a 10 on these. So that's good. So you can do the kind of checking, like how did those impact this, or vice versa? How does this actually impact those? Like you may be confident, but that there may be impact that is a blind spot for you on how you're getting these done because of this thing, whatever this thing is over here. That's fascinating. And really then, this kind of brings me to another question that I'm often asked. I don't get into arguments with people, but I will sometimes sort of debate this question a little bit, which is this idea that executives really need consultants more than they need coaches. And I'm curious, I don't know that I agree with that. I mean, I do think they need somebody who understands that process that they're about to go through, can help them find these blind spots, but then help them to explore them from themselves. But what is your take on this idea that they really need a consultant to just tell them kind of what their steps are going to be and what they need to be focused on?
Well, I mean, first off, what I would say, Lyssa, is that those 40% who have failed out of the 20,000 placements all had the best consultants available to them. Some of them even had coaches maybe supporting them, right? So I'm not sure there's any guarantee in this world that if you were to hire, I don't know, I'm going to drop a name, McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group, you will be safe. You know, it's like a life vest. You cannot drown. You know, no matter how deep the ocean is, you will always stay afloat. Well, if that was the case, they would be, making a fortune. And so that is not true. What I would say, though, is, and this is why transition coaching is a different discipline than the true sense of coaching, which is the ICF way of coaching, right? All you do is asking insightful questions and the client will figure everything out on their own. I look at transition coaching as, if this was a Venn diagram, you have 3 different kind of forces at play. And depending on the session and depending on the context of the leader, one may be a little more exposed than the other 2. And so the first one is coaching. This is like the heart and the center of it. This is not an advisory practice. It's not like mentorship. But the reality is there are elements of mentoring and there are elements of advisory that come in. Already by suggesting to the leader the 2 tools I just mentioned to you, I'm giving in a little bit of advice. I could just sit there and say, okay, what do you think are your upcoming transition challenges? And you would spend an hour or 2 just to, try to explore those. But when I give you the list of 20 transition challenges that I have seen the other 250 clients of mine struggling with, that makes it a lot easier for you to say, it's this, this, and this. Now, guess what? In 5 minutes, you have already realized and selected the topics that are deeply concerning to you. Now, that's why transition coaching works, which is there's a little bit of a guidance, not necessarily in terms of the solution, but in terms of having a funnel that is not too wide open, and then kind of, getting the client to explore what solution works best for them, to go back to what I call the 5 C's, the context, the culture, the commitment, the circles, and the confidence. And all 5 will have to be defined by the client, but the 5 C's are already set in stone. And so it's those forces at play, and that's why transition coaching, in its true sense, is not puristic coaching in the way that ICF considers that to be.
Well, and I think that what you're speaking to is so crucially important. Yes, could I sit here with you for days going, what do you see as your challenges? And if you don't come up with the things that I know you need to be paying attention to, then I'm having to work really hard to go, Navid, what about this or what about that, right? Whereas if you have this sort of list and this assessment process where the person can then kind of give themselves some, what's really showing up as important, it really is a partnered process. You're just giving information for them to kind of a menu. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell the chef how to cook my dinner usually, but I mean, I need a menu to kind of even get an idea of what's possible, right? And
Correct.
so what I'm hearing is it's really this sort of the interweaving of how do we support people to have insight and awareness? Because frankly, I think for a lot of people, they may know all this stuff, but when they're put on the spot, then all of a sudden they're applying it to themselves. We're asking them to think in a completely different way about themselves within a system and a process that they're in the middle of going through, which is probably not the best place for a brain to be creative and come up with every possible solution. So I don't know. I mean, honestly, I think that if I'm hearing you correctly, and kind of what's coming out of this for me is I don't think there's anything wrong with an assessment. I don't think there's anything wrong with tools that support people to get insight, so that then when you're having the conversation, okay, so my blind spot is that I'm just going to take something that I know. I had a conversation with one of my executive clients at one point that I'm very much customer focused and I want them to have the best of everything, but I'm not treating my teams the same way, and how that might play into how I am as a leader and how that might create problems. I'm not going to tell them after we've done the assessment, this is what you need to do, though. That's just the place now to get curious, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Well, and so I think it does stay with coaching. It's just there's some facilitation ahead of time for learning, so that the person that you're working with, the thinker that you're in partnership with, has an opportunity to even start to evaluate all of their options.
Yes, I give you one more example, if I may. And
I would
so,
love that.
When we talk about the double diamond framework of executive transitions, this is kind of my idea of the 12 plus months journey. There are 7 phases to this model, and there's a very good reason why I didn't come up with steps, because I find it very simplistic, which again is kind of the idea and the success of the first 90 days. The 5 steps to overcome trauma after 9/11. I don't know if the human brain is really that constructive to be able to deal with these things in that way. And so the 7 phases actually mean that each, and by the way, only one of the 7 phases is the first 90 days. So it's not like I don't think any leader should pay attention to the first 90 days. But there are 6 other phases that they need to pay attention to. There's another great book that's written by a gentleman I happen to know, Michael Burrows is his name. And he wrote another book that was nowhere near as famous as the first 90 days, but I find that it's equally valuable. And that book is called Before Onboarding. This is your minus 90 to day 0, which I took into the Double Diamond Framework. That is my first of the 7 phases. That's the discover phase. Why on earth, if Lyssa, you're going to be the incoming chief exec 2 months from now, why would you have to wait and sit on your hands until it's day 1 to start to onboard yourself? I mean, it's just beyond me strategically. It's like leaving money on the table. So there are things you can do. You can even, if the situation allows for it, reach out to your predecessor if they're still in the role or if they have been asked out to get their idea about what success looks like in the role. You could, if the announcement is made and it's public domain knowledge that you're the incoming chief exec, you could reach out to your future peers to introduce yourself. You could have a first virtual meeting with your future team that you're going to be inheriting. And so there are so many things you can do right now, although technically you haven't even started. And so what I then do is, because I've done this 250 times over, I have in my workbook that I work with the leaders through, let's say if it's the phase 1, discover, I describe to them what are typical activities during the first phase. And then I hand over to them and say, okay, what do you envisage, Lyssa, are typical activities that you would expect in your upcoming role? And not only that, I also give you the challenges and derailers that I have experienced working with other clients going through this first phase of yours. And again, now over to you. What do you foresee, because of the unique culture this organization has, because of the unique circumstance, its competitive position in the marketplace, because of the fact that there are many circles of influence informally even in this organization. So everything will come down to you, but there's a little bit of guidance and horizon, looking with you together, so that you're not completely in the dark and you have to figure everything out on your own.
Well, and I really think, if you look at like the competencies, the 7.5, coach shares without attachment, insights, knowledge, awareness, whatever, it's instincts, intuition with the thinker, and ask then for their thoughts. And so that is partnership. It's partnership with a purpose, but it's partnership that is about, let me share with you these things that I know. Now that you've heard them, what's showing up for you, thinker? How would you like to proceed? One of the things that you talk about in your book is the importance of reflection during transitions. And I'm curious, because I think that's probably twofold. As a person working with emerging leaders, how does that reflective process work for the work that you do? Is my first question. I'm going to start.
Yes. So, by the way, the first phase and the last phase, right, are the two most neglected phases. And believe it or not, Lyssa, these are the most potent phases of the 7-phase journey.
Of course they are.
Because not only do they require a deep level of reflection and foresight, and we know leaders are very good with, a lot of things, but trying to think out in the future is not something that comes to everyone easily. So this is the phase 7. And by the way, I don't know about you, Lyssa, but I will never remember any more than 3 things at the same time, which is why I choose the first letter of each of the phases to make up the word diamond, if you were to think of it that way. So the first phase is discover. That's your -90 to day 0. The second phase is immerse. That's your first day to 90 days. The first phase is adapt. This is your day 91 to day 120, so this is your 4th month in the role. The 4th one is mobilize. This is where you need to start to put the wheels into motion, right? Every president, every CEO, every division, whatever CEO gets 100 days grace period. This is where you need to start to show that you are the right person for the role, that you have the first ideas that will start to demonstrate some progress in the right direction. That gets us into the phase 5, operate. This is your first 6 to 9 months, 6 to 9. So operate is you now need to demonstrate that this stuff actually works. What you have been cooking up in your visual, presentations and all your town hall talks and all the wonderful, storytelling you have done to investors, analysts, and internal people is actually legit. And that gets us into the 6th phase, which is nourish. This is month 9 to 12. This is where you now need to show that the stuff really works, as if the market share starts to grow, the profitability improves, the engagement rates go higher, the EVP of the organization becomes more valuable, and therefore the market cap goes up. And that gets us into the 7th and last phase, which is develop. So that's diamond, and the last D is a develop, which is, again, it's very easy to drop the ball and say, okay, successful transition. Thank you very much, dear coach. I'm now on to, the trajectory of my role. Yes, and only one session. That's what I asked him. And of course, there's a bit of pre-work that goes into that. Let's sit down now, Lyssa, for a minute and review the last 12 months that you and I have been together on this journey. Okay, shall we? Now, what were some of the biggest surprises that you did not expect to come your way, right? Okay, and you will say 1, 2, and 3, right? I really didn't see that coming, or that really caught me off guard. Great. Now let's go back. If you could rewind back in time, you had a time machine. What were some of the early signals that you didn't quite pay attention to that led to the, negative surprise or whatever that caught you off guard? right? Okay, so this and that. Okay, so and then you work with the leader. And now, Lyssa, if you were to be appointed chief exec of a much larger organization, how might you want to think about your upcoming transition differently without knowing anything about the organization, just based on everything you have learned and embodied as an experience during the last 12 plus months? That is what I call reflection, and that is going to be serving you extremely well in any and all future transitions, because this is what makes us learn. It's the failures and the learning from the failures that makes us grow, not the successes, because oftentimes we're not really good in attributing what actually resulted in that success.
Yeah. I really think of this as sort of harvesting the wisdom from the experience. There was a client I was working with, and he was in a PhD program, and it was funny because in the program they were requiring them to do a failure resume. And so they were to write down every failure they'd ever had and what they learned from it. And I think in some ways that's what I'm hearing here. It isn't like a failure resume, like you don't have to come up with 20 job descriptions, but like, what are these 3 things? And I love this, taking the thinker back to what were the earliest indicators in hindsight now that might have been related to this experience that you had, and then the moving them forward. I think that's just brilliant, Navid, and then if you were to have your next job in this next position, what are you going to do differently, knowing what you now know? So powerful, so powerful. How do you do this in your own work with yourself? Like, how do you use the diamond model with Navid?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm done with my executive transitions. I think that's a true statement. I jumped ship 2 years ago from the big corporate, and I never look back. And what I get to do is just a nice part of what I used to do, just the nice parts, which is I get to work with the leaders that I decide to want to do the work with. In a corporate, if you work in a supporting function like HR, finance, sometimes it can come across as forced marriage. Meet your new business partner, Lyssa deHart. And you're like, oh my goodness, Lyssa, I'm not too sure that's going to be a happy marriage. But hey, yes, Lyssa, great to meet you.
You're going to love me. Yeah. You're going to love me.
Yeah. So, and that's the reality. You don't get to pick your business partner if you're a support function leader. At least in my case, it was very rarely the case that I could say, I would much rather prefer to work with Lyssa than with, Tom over here. And so that's beautiful. And then the other thing about the Double Diamond framework, which again, it took me a long time to come up with this framework and the book, it was a 7-year journey, is that it really is like cooked through and through. It's not like, I woke up the other day and had this great idea, I just wrote it all down and submitted the manuscript and somehow it became an international bestseller. No. It was hard work. I struggled. I mean, can you believe it? I had to use, and as you can tell, English is not my first language. I had to use the dictionary, the Webster's good old dictionary, to find the word for the 6th phase that starts with N and actually, says what I want to say in this phase. And nourish, this is how I found nourish. And so it really is. I've done this now 250 times plus over. And so it's not necessarily a framework that I apply to my own career anymore, because my career is now supporting other people's careers. But it's something that I am really kind of in the thick of it at any point in time. I mean, as we speak, Lyssa, I got 24 live engagements. So, and 20 of those 24 are executive transition coaching clients, right? So I'm like, whether I like it or not, I'm already in phase 1 with this one and phase 4 with this one. And this is where you start to apply all those, learnings. And every one of your clients benefits from someone who's been there and done that so many times over. And that's really powerful.
Well, and I mean, from my perspective, and I mean, correct me if this doesn't land, but I think of you as an executive, and even within your own business, how you move from this place in your business to that place in your business. I think every solopreneur out there, or if they have a small team, they're all executives. I mean, they're not necessarily working with billions of dollars of annual gross income or whatever, but they're having to stretch themselves from what got them here isn't necessarily going to get them there. And how do they make those sort of stretches themselves? I mean, how could we as coaches apply some of these principles to our own evolution as business owners, as we're developing and as we're moving into that's on the horizon line for us?
Sure. I mean, two things come up for me, and one of them is going to be slightly controversial that I will share with you now. So the first one is when I transitioned, from role to role to role, I didn't think of those as transitions. I just saw it as a promotional opportunity, or, I got this interesting assignment in Switzerland. Why not? Let's move to Switzerland. And my wife was always game. I have to give her that, right? She wherever I came up with an assignment, she said, honey, let's go. And so, I really got the benefit of being in the lead career of the two of us. And I really, I'm incredibly grateful for that. So I didn't think of those as transitions. And one of the funny things about my career, Lyssa, is that I never repeated the industry. So I worked in corporates for 26 years. The first 6 years in sales functions, by the way, and then I made a transition into HR. So I had a cross-functional transition myself. But in those 26 years, I worked for 7 industries. And so, I just found it super exciting to learn all about a new industry and then to see what can I apply from the previous 2 industries that I have experience into this one. And of course, every company and every industry believes they're so unique. There's nothing that could work that is from the outside world. And believe it or not, there's at least a handful of interventions that you can think of in the people function that you can actually cross-fertilize and cross-apply and actually get benefits that put you ahead of the competition. Because if all the competition does is just to look left and right? If you're in the financial services, they're famous for just being very insular, just looking inside. Nobody from outside can ever succeed. We are so complex. We are so this, we are so that. Well, the reality is, financial services was just one of the 7 industries that I had the pleasure of working for. And so that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is, and I'm not suggesting that is true, but what I do know is that most of the executives that choose to work with me select me because I have an embodied experience as a corporate executive myself. Now, I know some coaches will say, you don't need any of that. You can just be a great coach. That's all you need. That's going to be enough to get going with a client. I get that. And 8 out of 10 clients, when I go and ask them after the chemistry session, if they have decided to go ahead with me, in our first session, I say, may I ask you this question? What were the 2 or 3 reasons you actually decided to trust me and be part of this journey with me together? And 8 out of 10 times is like, because you have been in the trenches, because you have these scar wounds all over your face, because you know what it means to survive in the corporate world as an executive. And that's what spoke to me. I wanted to partner with someone who's been there and done that. Now, that's my reality, and I'm not suggesting it's the only reality, but that's also something that I know is contested in the coaching world, where there's 2 schools of thought. One says you can be anyone and anyone, you can coach anyone and everyone, and the other one is saying, well, it would actually be a little more helpful if you shared some of those experiences, some of those skills with the clients that you are going to work with, more of them.
Yeah, no, and I have no disagreement with you on this. I mean, I think that there are different things that people are looking for when they're looking for a coach. And I think lived experience, it's a two-sided issue, because sometimes with experience, I bring my expertise too much. And I'm a bit like you early in coaching, where the mentor comes in and goes, so you talked 62% of the time. And the client spoke 38. And so let's have a conversation about how you maybe even that out. But really I think that the real nugget of my question, though, is how, as a coach who is also an entrepreneur and in many ways an executive myself running a small team, how do I use these principles for myself that I can so that I can move from where I am now? Because when I first started, it was just me all by myself going, I'm just going to throw my hat in the ring here and let's see what happens. And then I just kept doing it, right? But then at some point you have to grow and you have to get support. You have to show up slightly differently. You have to be able to let go of things. And so I guess that's the question, is for those coaches listening, they may or may not want to work with executives. They may, and they're going to take away a great deal of thought and feedback from you on that. But how do they also themselves start to realize that they are the head of their own business, and that this is, and may, again, not $1 billion personal income or generating billions of dollars annually in my business doesn't change the fact that I am the head of it and I am the executive in this particular organization. I think that's one of the curiosities that I have from you.
Sure. I will be giving you 2 concrete examples, and it's a shame we don't have the visual right up here, but you have to imagine 2 diamonds, facing each other, kind of on the side. You look at the diamonds sideways, and then there is a half circle on the top and the half circle on the bottom of this framework. And the half circle on the top says, optimizing the energy levels of the executive leader, right? Which I took from a gentleman called Tony Schwartz. He wrote with a lady whose name I can't remember right now, a very famous article on Harvard Business Review. He actually gave birth to this concept of his, and the HBR article goes something like, optimize your energy levels, not your time, right? And he makes the very potent point that this is the first hunch of any executive when they go through a transition or get a bigger, broader kind of role and remit, that they just give more time to the job, constantly more time. And of course, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that, burnout is looming on the horizon, and probably sleeping 4 hours a night, unless you have some, genetic disposition that doesn't really, place you in the average population. I can tell you, Lyssa, if I didn't sleep 6 hours every night, I would be highly irritable to anyone, including my own family, right? And so that's the first part. And then he cites 4 different quadrants that you need to nourish in order to be at your best. And this is what I learned, my 3-year coach journey to train myself up to become a coach. The second year was pretty much around how to show up as a coach, right? What is the vessel you need and the vehicle to serve clients 3, 4, 5, or however many you do per day, so that you are at your best. This is one of the things I love about being a solopreneur now, which is, I could just go to one of these coaching aggregators and have like 12 coaching sessions a day, right? And you can guess what is the quality of coaching I will deliver to the 12th client on a Friday evening at 8 o'clock my time, right? And so what I do now is I have carved out entirely the Friday from coaching. There's no coaching happening Fridays with me. The second part of the day is not even bookable by anyone, even if it's a question or something they want, because I need reflection time. I need thinking time. I don't want just to be stuck in the framework that I gave birth to 2.5 years ago. I want to evolve that. I want to think about other ways how I might go about working with my clients. I need to nourish this body and this vehicle that I have here. And so I've been meditating for about 10 years now without interruption. So that's how I optimize my energy levels, not necessarily as an executive leader, but as a coach who serves execs. And then the bottom part of that says accelerated and de-risked by an executive transition coach. Right now, I don't need a transition coach because I'm already kind of the transition coach. But this is why I work with people such as yourself, who are more experienced, more capable, and knowledgeable than I am, to guide me in my coaching practice as mentors and supervisors.
Yeah, and I think that is such a, supervision comes up all the time on this podcast, because I think it is so crucially important for all of us that we are in some form of self-reflective around our work with people. And I love what you're doing with the meditative practice and the other things that you do to take care of yourself, and also having a sounding board to talk about the stuff that is happening between us and our work is crucially important also, so that we can reflect. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. You have shared so many really important books that I'll be making links to, the video that I'll be making a link to. I'm starting to ask people to, one, answer a question that a guest before you has asked for an unknown guest that is now you. And I'll be asking that question to you right now, which is, what do you wish you had known when you were starting out that you now know?
Oh, I love that question. Right. It's my own time machine, right? If I were to go back in time, what would, I mean, the real uncertainty I had, Lyssa, was that arguably I was a very successful executive for 26 years of my professional life. And that really served me well. It nourished me and my family. It got us into some incredible companies and countries. And, if you're an exec and you have figured out how to be successful, although there are no guarantees, you once you know how to, work effectively within a system, if you apply that knowledge over and over again, you are likely to continue that journey. What I didn't know is how easy it would be for me to make the transition from a corporate exec into a full-time coach. I had all these, thoughts and, is it going to work out? What if it doesn't work out, right? That's my kind of German part of the brain waking up saying, what guarantee do you have that it is actually going to work out? Like, what makes you believe that you could be successful just by yourself without anything, no system, no policy, no nothing? And so I had a lot of such thoughts right at the outset. But of course, I never even picked up the phone when headhunters called me, because I just saw that not only is this working and nourishing kind of my life, but also it's such a wonderful, wonderful activity and such a joy to be giving and getting back in return. And that kind of, that infinity side is just something that I wish I had known right at the outset, that everything is going to be all right. I just couldn't know that. And my brain just works in funny ways. And so I had all these thoughts. And, I remember that summer, it was the summer of 22. It was only 2 years ago when we kind of transitioned from London to Dubai as a family, and we made a full commitment. We came down here, we shipped everything we had in a container, we bought a place, we moved in, and I set up my business, and I didn't want to look back, and luckily and thankfully I never had to look back.
Brilliant. Navid, I'm sorry. It's been such a wonderful, wonderful conversation with you today. Before we close out, what question would you pass forward to the next person?
Right. So I can return the favor, can I?
That's right. Pay it forward.
I guess the question I would share with a future guest of yours is, how would you define your purpose? Beautiful.
And on that note, thank you Thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful conversation and for joining me here in the studio.
Thank you so much, Lyssa, for the warm welcome and the warm conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I would love to stay in touch.